Welcome to Trial Site News Weekly Roundup. My name is Adrian, and I'll be going over some of our top news stories from this past week. This week we start our roundup with virus-related news. Regeneron Pharmaceuticals has identified hundreds of virus-neutralizing antibodies and plans to initiate large-scale manufacturing by mid-April with antibody cocktail therapy. Now, they announced in a press release that they believe this target candidate has the potential to enter into human clinical studies by early summer. Now, this is in addition to their ongoing program evaluating Kevzara, sirolimus, and IL-6 receptor antibody in severe COVID-19 patients. Now, in order to meet the pressing public health need, Regeneron is applying its Velocimab technology to prepare manufacturing-ready cell lines as lead antibodies are selected so that clinical scale production can begin immediately. The company is working towards the goal of producing hundreds of thousands of prophylactic doses per month by the end of summer and hopes to have smaller quantities available for initial clinical testing at the beginning of the summer. Now, the company is working with the U.S. Health and Human Services Biomedical Advanced Research and Defense Authority, or BARDA, to increase capacity even further. Elsewhere, the University of Queensland Center for Clinical Research has reported that they are close to moving a couple COVID-19 vaccine targets, both repurposed older drugs, to clinical trials by the end of March 2020. Professor David Patterson reports that his lab is looking at one HIV-focused drug and another, chloroquine, which was developed to treat malaria. Now, laboratory evidence and some progress out of China has influenced this research team's efforts, but the investigators down under employ rigorous, systematic, and methodical clinical trials to verify the data. The focus on these two drugs potentially bring a new lease on life as their use has largely been superseded by a newer generation of therapies, reports news.com.au in Australia. Now, Professor Patterson at the University of Queensland Center for Clinical Research reports that there is some evidence supporting these candidates. Now, for example, in one case, one of the medications was given to some of the first people tested positive for COVID-19 and resulted in a complete recovery. Now, on the other hand, misinformation about the use of chloroquine is rife, as evidenced by a recent AFP fact check highlighting widespread misleading or fake news. For example, claims were widely shared in Nigeria that chloroquine was effective against the coronavirus and cured 12,552 patients in China. Unfortunately, very bad people are exploiting the COVID-19 crisis to attempt to gain financial advantage. All, from researchers to citizens consuming news, need to be on guard, critical and as methodical as possible in understanding the truth. Professor Patterson also noticed that some potential evidence recently published by Chinese researchers points out that Remdesivir and chloroquine are highly effective in the control of 2019 infection in vitro. Now, the Chinese researchers noted that these compounds have been used in humans safely and that they should be assessed in clinical trials. Now, Professor Patterson reported that although promising, the data originating out of China needs to be questioned and validated in clinical research, and he wants to validate them on the grounds in Australia. However, he noted that as Wuhan, China was the epicenter for the crisis, and as events unfolded, there was quite a bit of chaos, and hence the data gathered wasn't done in a very controlled way. As for understandable reasons, local health systems were stretched and a methodical and orderly research apparatus hadn't yet necessarily materialized. Of course, Trial Site News has observed the considerable research and development imperative manifest out of China since. However, Professor Patterson's point is that the data produced in the first days must be more systematically validated and verified. Elsewhere, the Israeli government, via the Israeli Innovation Authority, is granting Israeli companies an initial amount of $13 million for COVID-19 focused research and development with an emphasis on products and technologies. Additionally, the Israel Innovation Authority, Ministry of Economy, and the Manufacturers Association of Israel are encouraging companies to submit research and development plans for the expedited production of technologies that can help fight the virus as the pandemic grows. The government will subsidize up to 75% of approved projects' expenditures as part of this emergency program. Now, in parallel, research and development led by Israelis MIGAL modified an IBV vaccine for a potential experimental COVID-19 vaccine candidate. The Israeli press recently reported that Israeli scientists were on the cusp of developing the first vaccine against the novel coronavirus, based on reports from Ofer Akunis, Minister of Science and Technology. Now, with statements that a vaccine could be available within weeks to 90 days, Trial Site News interprets this to mean ready for clinical trials and not commercialization. University hospitals in Cleveland, Ohio have secured participation in 2 clinical trials that will offer the investigational antiviral drug Remdesivir, Gilead, to hospitalized patients with pneumonia due to COVID-19. One clinical trial will focus on COVID-19 patients with moderate illness, while the other deals with those that are more severe illness who may need to be in the intensive care unit or ICU. Now, these studies will be conducted by the UH Clinical Research Center under the leadership of Grace McComsey, MD, Vice President Research and Associate Chief Scientific Officer at UH. The need for rigorous, professionally conducted research activity that goes on every day in our UH Clinical Research Center is critical in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, said Dr. McComsey. There is no established treatment for the novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19. The trials we are preparing to conduct are especially significant because they test an active antiviral treatment rather than just supportive care. The first week seeks to evaluate the efficacy of 2 Remdesivir regimens compared to the standard care, as measured by the proportion of participants discharged on or before day 14 of their hospitalization. The primary goal of the second trial is to evaluate the efficacy of 2 different Remdesivir regimens and their ability to normalize patients' temperature and oxygen situation through day 14. The 2 studies will open at UH Cleveland Medical Center. UH is hoping to open the trials at UH Ahuja, Parma, and St. John Medical Centers. These sites are exploring other trials as well. Meanwhile, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, issued guidance for industry investigators and institutional review boards conducting clinical trials during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the agency is exhibiting a pragmatic sense of urgency, sharing with those conducting clinical trials the federal authorities' understanding of the extreme conditions now faced by the nation. The FDA seeks to keep clinical research going and is offering a level of flexibility to work with sponsors to manage how clinical trials may be impacted by changing conditions on the ground. The agency recognizes that the COVID-19 pandemic may impact the conduct of clinical trials of medical products, such as drugs, devices, and biological products. Now, they indicate that considerable challenges could manifest. For example, involving quarantine, site closures, travel limitations, interruptions to the supply chain for the investigational product, or other material factors if investigator site personnel become infected with SARS-CoV-2. Now, sponsors and sites may face increasing difficulty in conducting clinical research in the form of clinical trials. Hence, the FDA reports that, for example, multiple protocol modifications may become necessary, and there may be unavoidable protocol deviations during this crisis. The impact on trials will vary depending on a number of elements and factors, from the nature of disease and study, the trial design, the region, etc. The FDA suggests that sponsors evaluate alternative methods for assessment, such as phone contacts or virtual visits, and offering additional safety monitoring for the trial participants who may no longer have access to investigational product or the investigational site. Anand Shah, and the FDA Deputy Commissioner for Medical and Scientific Affairs, declared that with this guidance issued today, the FDA is helping industry and investigators navigate the COVID-19 pandemic and help assess how to move forward with critical clinical trials. The FDA released this guidance to emphasize that at all times, patients' safety should continue to be the forefront of considerations. He said that we want to support the continuance of these clinical trials in compliance with good clinical practice and minimizing risks to trial integrity while also safeguarding the health and well-being of study participants. The Infectious Disease Division at Massachusetts General Hospital, or the MGH, is the first center in New England to enroll patients in an international study of Remdesivir, the antiviral drug, with an aim to treat those afflicted with COVID-19. The study's principal investigator, Elizabeth Hauman, MD, reports that because the drug is known to halt replication in other viruses, the hope is that the virus can work against COVID-19. Now, she cautioned that we don't know how well it works in humans, but we are hopeful. Now, a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial with 4 patients is already enrolled at MGH. It turns out that those enrolled have a 50% chance to getting the drug. A total of 30 patients are enrolled nationally. Now, MGH seeks to enroll up to 30 to 40 patients of the total for the entire clinical trial and hopes to reach 440. A total of 50 sites are participating in the study. The trial protocol calls for a review of data every 50 participants who enroll in the trial. And the hope is that after 6 weeks, study teams will obtain useful information, reports Dr. Hauman. Now, of course, other research goes on at MGH, including COVID-19 patients, including the following: testing of inhaled nitric oxide to improve breathing in COVID-19 patients with severely damaged lungs using gas to effectively kill coronavirus in the lungs in early infection. Use of drugs such as tulisumab that ramp down the immune response to mitigate late lung damage in severe COVID-19 patients and decipher which patients would benefit most from the drug. Determining what part of the immune system is activated in the virus and when, using such information to repurpose drugs to modulate or alter the trajectory and prevent severe disease, using this information to develop effective vaccines and quickly. And investigators also have an interest in the study of biomarkers and those with varying degrees of illness to help doctors understand who might most benefit from specific standard medical interventions and who safely recover from home. Now, Trial Site News will continue to keep up on this story and keep you posted on how things develop. And now we turn to diabetes. The world's first licensed downloadable artificial pancreas app for those with type 1 diabetes was launched recently based on the research of Professor Roman Hovorka with the University of Cambridge and Cambridge University Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust in the UK. Now, known as the CAM APS FX app, it works with an insulin pump and a glucose monitor to automatically deliver insulin to those living with the condition via a complex algorithm. A venture called CamDiab commercializes the technology. Now, apparently this app will take over much of the management of type 1 diabetes effort, usually involving a routine of finger prick blood tests and insulin injections or infusions just to stay alive. Now, this is because their pancreas no longer produces insulin by itself. Now, this new technology can be a lifesaver, as at night some of the type 1 diabetes experience dangerously low levels of low blood glucose levels. The product will be supported by a small number of UK diabetes clinics. The users of this app will need to confirm which clinic they attend, and they must be using a Dana RS pump and Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. Note that the Professor As a note, the Professor Hovorka is not done. He and the research team seek to bring this technology to all who need it via the NHS. The key for this will be the generation of data to support the case for NHS funding. Now, this is a promising approach that could benefit many. Now, those interested in applicability elsewhere should connect with the venture charged with commercializing the technology, CamDiab. Do you have any clinical news you'd like us to report on? If so, let us know. Contact information is in the box below. Thank you for joining us for this week's Trial Site News Roundup, and remember, subscribe and ring the bell to be notified of updates. We'll see you next time.